Do we have everybody at this point?
Just letting you guys know you are live.
Okay. Okay, I will call the joint select board of health meeting to order, 1 o'clock, April 17th. We are meeting via Zoom as directed under Governor Baker's order of March 12th that allows some provisions outside of the open meeting law in terms of remote participation due to COVID-19. And we'll be taking all votes by roll call. I'm not going to go through whether everyone can hear me at the moment, but if anybody is having an issue, could they raise their hand? And generally, could we raise hands as we go through this meeting? I will go to Chairman Visco to call the Board of Health end of things to order.
Thanks everybody for showing up. This is the joint meeting of the Select Board and Nantucket Board of Health. Friday, April 17, 2020. Call the meeting to order. I won't go through what you just said, all the other stuff about the open meeting law stuff. So
I'm starting to try and paraphrase that a little bit because it's too long. So how shall we start? The Board of Health met yesterday. We met on Wednesday to start discussing loosening some provisions at the guidance of the hospital that we are safe to do so in regard to the landscaping and the construction end of things where our orders are more restrictive than the state's. And there's a couple of drafts that have been circulated. I think the Board of Health had some comments on the draft. Who wants to start with their thoughts? Feel free to raise a hand or.
Yeah, and we'll open it up to, just raise your hand first. Rita?
Oh, or Jim? Oh, Rita? Yep.
No, I was just scratching my head. Sorry.
Jim Cooper? Oh, Jim, you're muted.
Pardon me?
You're muted. We couldn't hear you.
You can't hear me?
You're good now.
Okay.
You're good
On
now.
these two things that we got about the landscaping and my one question is, I assume all these things will be printed in Spanish and English. Is that true?
I see Roberto shaking his head yes.
Yes.
They will be. And
Yes.
and how will these be accessible? Will the companies have to go somewhere to pick all these rules and regulations up? Because I'm sure everyone isn't privy to the same thing that we're talking about right now. So how will that work out?
Libby?
They will be posted on the town website. They will be available at various locations, I would imagine, such as here at the police station, the Plus department, in there, somewhere probably outside but covered up. The Builders Association offered to help circulate them, so we would tap into them for however they would do that. We can get them around however we can get them around. People have thoughts about that, that'd be great.
Jeff? Jeff, you're muted. Oh.
Yep, sorry about that. Yeah, just to answer the question as far as the landscapers go, we keep a pretty extensive list related to our commercial fertilizer licensing. And that's an active email list of about 300 individuals. So we'll also be emailing those out as well as making them available on the website and any other means possible. But anyone who's on that list will get a copy of the final version.
And I have one other question. It states that all material will have to be delivered to the job site. Is Marine Home Center and Island Lumber and Valero and Sons, are they all going along with this, that they will in fact deliver to all these job sites?
I thought it was a directive that where possible, try to get everything delivered at once to minimize trips. But there may be some things that I would imagine people would just have to run and pick up. Curbside. Matt?
Yeah, I have a suggestion for that. I think that they'd like to deliver the big stuff as much as possible and have as much added on. They don't want the traffic in their buildings, and their employees don't. I do think maybe we could do is have the authorized person pick up the small stuff. You know, if there's a person doing oversight on these job sites, have that person be the person dedicated to do it, to keep it from being every single person going in and out all day.
Okay, thank you.
Does that sound okay to everyone? Jason, go ahead. Oh, or Libby, do you want?
I was only going to say, I don't know through town council if that needs to be adjusted in the order, but maybe we get to that later.
Jason?
Yeah, I just want to add on to Jim's question about how we get this to everybody in different languages. There's a small group of translators that are taking these bigger documents and either taking off what Libby says on like her morning show, or Dawn's helping them, or I am trying to explain all this and put it down, and they will speak. They will translate it, verbally into audio, into video, and getting it to different people, because not everybody can figure this out. So there's groups that are starting to do that and getting the word out through video and audio in different languages.
Great, thank you.
Leslie?
Oh, hi, Madam Chair. I just wanted to chime in that the delivery language will definitely need to be modified in the draft that's going around right now.
We also had a little bit of discussion about maybe not putting in any site-specific projects, just having it fall under the criteria that we discussed of any project that is that is deemed to be a year-round housing.
I have a question.
Jim?
How will you decide what is year-round housing and what isn't? I mean, at the top of page 3, it states that the houses that haven't been completely framed, you will allow to frame the roof, frame the shingle the outside, put the windows and doors in, but nothing inside. Now, what if those houses are for Nantucket people?
Then if they meet the residence, we talked about them meeting the residence requirements that like the steamship has, or if they're registered voter. I mean, we talked about a few different things where it would be deemed to be year-round, or actually year-round or employee housing.
Right.
And I don't know if maybe Leslie can speak to that, how that would be evaluated.
So then would all crews be able to go in and complete that house?
Yes.
They would. All right. Okay. Thank you.
And then there's also been some talk about adding back in the one worker as long as they register on kind of any job site that would be a little bit more consistent with regular caretaking activities, or just a plumber who wants to go in and plug away at finishing an unfinished house. Leslie, did you want to?
I just wanted to chime in on the year-round housing and the employee housing. We had a prior draft that had that the residency had to be proved to the satisfaction of the building commissioner, rather than trying to list all of the different options that they could use. So I think that would work. And I had another comment, but for the crews that can go in, they're still limited to 4 under the order, regardless of the work.
Further questions, comments, discussion? I think there's a few revisions to the landscaping. Maybe Jeff or Rita want to go over those. Right, Libby?
I was just going to suggest that I don't know if you want to approach it this way, and I know that there were a lot of drafts flying around on this thing, but the most recent one that I am looking at is the one that Leslie sent about noontime. I don't know if everybody has that in their email, but there's a number of comments that I don't know maybe if the board wants to go through those. And some of them are included in what you've already just a little bit talked about, the deliveries and the year-round housing. So I don't know, maybe you want to do landscaping first and then come back to this, but the comments, this can't really be finalized until these comments are addressed, and I think they are policy issues for the board.
Yeah. Do you want to lead us through those, or?
I could, with the assistance of Leslie and whoever else worked on it, town council, I guess. Does everybody have the draft that Leslie sent at about noontime? It came in email. Roberto, was that able to have gone to the Board of Health?
I believe so, but I'll go ahead and forward it again.
I just want to really
Pulling it
make
up
sure.
now. I just can't track the changes on my phone, so that's why. And I can't pull everything up on my screen and be able to.
I know. So I can go through.
I need to like that stockbroker layout where I have the screens in front of me.
Why,
Steve Visca.
yeah, why don't we have Livy go through those? And I mean, I briefly saw it, and I'm sure most of the board members might not have had time to open it up and look at it. So
Okay.
everybody would be fine with that.
All right. So page 1, as you know, outlines the purpose of the order. No comments there. And then there's a few paragraphs about the status of emergency order number 1. And there's a little bit of change there, but I don't think there's any substantive issues there. There's a couple things in this. So at the top of page 2, 2 things. Number 1, there was some discussion the last time the board talked about this, and even the Board of Health yesterday, about covering the activation of, things like water in a house that nobody's currently physically in at the moment. So that is covered under here. That would be allowed. And then there's a date that says, paragraph at the very end of page 1, for the purposes of emergency supplemental order and the emergency order number 5, which would be this: projects comprising other work necessary to render residential buildings fully habitable shall mean work on a residential building and used for dwelling purposes. And where the work relates to the habitability of the structure, such as work on kitchens, bathrooms, plumbing, and electrical work, including activation of existing utilities, that's where the water thing comes in, emergency repairs, and the completion of work on renovations started prior to March 10th, 2020. I don't really know where that date came from, but Leslie has a comment why March 10th should be March 20th, which is when the Board of Health order went into effect. So I'm not really sure where that March 10th date came from. So that would be maybe point number 1.
Anybody have an issue with it being March 20th? Oh, Greg, sorry.
Hi, everyone. Yes, I put that date in there. That's the date that a lot of the state orders track from. But there's certainly nothing that would prevent you, excuse me, from choosing a different date. So if your orders have been tracking for March 20th, then that's fine. We can make that change.
Okay. Does anybody have an issue with that? So, by unit, Christy?
I don't have an issue with the date, but more of a question or clarification. Does this paragraph relate to all buildings, or just the ones that we're saying are emergency for to become weather tight?
So when we discussed this the other day, and when I spoke with Andrew about this over the phone, I don't know if he's on this call or not, but there was some concern about the original emergency order and what this phrase, other work necessary to render occupied residential buildings fully habitable. And in particular, I don't think people really understood what the term occupied meant. Did it mean, physically occupied at that very moment? What would happen if you left temporarily in order to do the work? So the intent of this was to clarify that one particular provision. And what this does is it essentially creates a category unto itself of what we think is essentially emergency work. And it's work that relates to a residential building that has a certificate of occupancy, and where the work relates to the habitability of the structure. So it's not going to relate to things that are new, like additions. But if you started a kitchen renovation prior to all this happening, you can finish that kitchen renovation. You can hook up utilities. You can activate your water. If a tree fell and put a hole in your roof, you can fix the hole in your roof. So that was the original intent of that provision. But because we found that it was unclear, we're offering this clarification as guidance.
Thank you.
That answer your question? Okay, so next. Abigail?
Okay, so also, Greg, are you tracking these changes so that they can be made when we're all done?
Yes.
Okay. All right, next, under, I think this is page 2, part 1, allowable construction. There's a sentence that says, for the purposes of this order, the terms site, job site, and project shall all be deemed to mean all work occurring pursuant to the same building or shingle permit, whether the work is occurring in one or more locations. And I had a comment that at your meeting on Wednesday night, I thought the idea was to make this per property in the event that there are multiple buildings on one property. It means, not all of that at the same time, because that would allow more people at the so-called job site. And Greg said he was trying to be as expansive as possible. I will leave it to staff to decide how to address this issue. I don't really know how to address it, but Leslie, I think on Wednesday night had suggested that it would go by the property. But Leslie, I don't know, maybe if this wording is sufficient.
Leslie?
So the wording that's in the document now would allow people to work on, say, a second dwelling that's not totally weather tight and a primary dwelling that's not totally weather tight, as long as there aren't more than 4 people working on each structure. So that would allow more people on the property, but of course they would have to socially distance and follow all of the COVID protocols. So if the intent is to only allow 4 on the entire property, then this language would need to be modified, and that would be a lot more restrictive.
What do members from either board feel about that? Matt?
I think it depends on what happens with, sort of one person, one job site. It would be a huge mistake to have people drive by some of the larger job sites and see, 80 guys working while they're forced to sit at home and not work. So, we've got to think of, A, we have to think of safety, but B, we have to think of, fairness and equity. So I just want to make sure we haven't left a huge loophole where, we've got a bunch of people working and, and half the islanders not able to do anything.
Yeah, I'm a little bit worried for places that have multiple building permits, because you could have like 4 or 5 building permits on one site. And if it's a 3-acre site, that's different than if it's a half-acre site. But that just really gets expansive in how many workers could fall under that 4. So maybe we just want to keep it at 4 per property for now, for this phase. Stephen Bisco?
Yeah, you just took the words right out of my mouth. It could always change later on, but I think for now would be by the property. Thanks.
Okay, so let's modify that language. Is that the consensus? I mean, people just start waving at me if they have an issue, I guess. But okay, what's the next?
There's a section that addresses partially framed structures, dwellings, or additions. To allow the continued construction of partially framed houses to be framed so that the structure can be made weather tight, including the installation of roofing materials, windows, and siding, but no interior finishing such as drywall, flooring, electrical, plumbing, or HVAC work. Leslie has a comment. This houses should be changed to structure. I think this was in a prior draft for consistency. Also, the current wording would exclude any commercial projects that would otherwise meet this criteria. I think there are a few, like 4 commercial projects that really need to be buttoned up. Leslie, I don't know if you want to say anything more about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think we could just do that towards buildings. It's all about becoming weather tight, but Leslie, do you want to expand on that at all? Okay. How does everybody feel about that? Anybody? Consensus that that's fine? Jason? Jason?
Yeah, I'm fine with that. I just, the more I'm listening to this, I'm thinking, are these measures that the fine details we're getting into more than one person at a job site? Because what Matt said, if we are thinking about allowing one person at a job site, how does these restrictions fall into that?
This is separate. This is when people would be exposed to each other. I mean, I think we do have to talk about if we're going to go back to allowing that provision of one at the job site, what are the parameters? Like I was thinking of something like no more than one person on any given day might be some clarifying language, because a lot of the craziness that came up was people saying, well, can I go in for 2 hours and then this person go in for 2 hours and then this person go in for 2 hours? Kind of thing in terms of the one person. Go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, I think it's important to clarify for anybody watching this, the details we're looking at for a permit, a site or a building or a property that has a existing permit that could have more than one person. That's why we're trying to get into details. And we'll be talking about potentially at some point allowing one person at one site. I just want to make sure that's separated and clear.
So I think the 3 things that we're discussing in terms of the building order is expanding what is currently allowed under waivers to allow any building to be completed that is for either deemed by the building commissioner to either be for year-round housing or employee housing at his discretion. And then the other provisions are to make any structure on the island that it is currently open to the weather brought to a weather tight situation, whether it's windows, sidewall, roofing, chimneys that have been taken out, those kind of things, to prevent further property damage. But the limitations would be to 4 workers on any given site is what's currently being discussed. The other provision that we were going to go back to was talking about whether one worker could be on any site as long as they register their name and the address they're going to be working on, so that there's a list compiled at the building department in case there's any questions about what's allowed, and that it would be clarified that it would be one worker on a given day, maybe, or unless anybody else has any ideas on that. But so those are the multiple things that we're talking about. Just because I imagine this document has not been circulated to the public. Libby, do you want to continue?
Sure. So we're going to change. So Greg, you got that. We're going to change houses to structures. Next, I'm not sure this is an issue. Oh, there was an issue here. Other residential under unfinished sidewall work to allow for the completion of any exterior sidewall work. And then it says other residential construction. That might Greg, maybe need to be its own little category. You see how there's a bullet there? That, I'm not sure that's intended. It's probably its own thing. You see what I mean?
So mine doesn't have the bullet, but that was intended to be the next category,
Okay.
not part of unfinished sidewall work, but a category unto itself.
And that's where it was not necessarily name the projects, because that, you know, there are a number of things that will fall under year-round housing and employee housing that have been like roughly identified, but
Yeah, so that's out. So
Okay.
now what it would say is work on the following housing projects may, this might need to be reworded a bit. Work on the following housing projects may be permitted subject to further site-specific orders of the Board of Health. Workforce rental community. Any dwelling deemed to be specifically for year-round use or employee housing. And Leslie, you have a question there about, I think it's about the Board of Health. Do you want to go over that?
Yeah, so my question was, I hadn't seen this in a prior draft. I didn't recall the Board of Health talking about this yesterday. And I didn't know where the Board of Health review came from on this bullet. I mean, I thought that the intent from the select board meeting on Wednesday, I'm losing track of days here, was to allow certain types of, you know, workforce housing, year-round housing, and employee housing to continue, subject to the review of the building commissioner and the criteria in this document. And this wording implies that it would require an extra level of review by the Board of Health for something specific to each site. I mean, and that seems like, you know, a lot of paperwork and a lot of involvement from the Board of Health when it could just be addressed in this document.
wouldn't it just have to be compliant with all of the COVID-19 parameters that would go on to
I thought that's what the intention was. So I'm not sure where this Board of Health language came
someone
from.
can clarify that, maybe Greg?
Yes, I put that language in there only more as a placeholder, because I didn't know how you wanted to determine which projects would be allowed and who would be making that determination. So I sort of put Board of Health in there by default. Based on this discussion, it sounds like you want that to be the building commissioner, and that's fine. So I have no issue with making that change if that's the way you want it to be. And then, you know, my understanding is that once the work is deemed by the building commissioner to be for year-round workforce or employee housing, then all of the other requirements of this document apply, including the 4-worker maximum.
Yes, I think that was the intent. Matt, did you have a question? Matt, you're muted.
What bullet point? I'm lost.
I think it's where it's listed what the kind of exemptions are in this order that would allow the up to 4 workers on a site, which is the weather tight and the what's deemed to be year-round or employee housing.
Matt, it's about halfway down page 2 under unfinished sidewall work, but it's going to become its own category called other residential construction. You see it? And the idea is to take out site-specific orders of the Board of Health and replace the Board of Health with building commissioner, yeah? Is all the rest of that wording okay, Leslie, as far as you can tell, or whoever?
So I was going to propose that we take all of that out and have it simply say, any work deemed to be specifically for year-round workforce or employee housing as allowed by the building commissioner.
not year-round workforce, year-round. I mean, or workforce or employee housing.
Yeah, I thought it was three
Just-
categories: year
Yes.
round,
Okay, just making sure
workforce, yeah, or
that it's not year-round workforce, because that's only one project that's going on.
okay.
So any year-round housing.
So just to be clear, so I understand it, it's year-round housing, year-round workforce housing, and year-round employee housing?
Round housing, but like the Dreamland, I don't think that would apply because some of their, I think it's just, it's whether it's employee housing. Right? I mean, does anybody have any thoughts on that, Leslie?
So no workforce.
No,
I think it would be,
workforce should be in there.
Okay.
What? Sorry, Leslie.
that's okay. Year-round housing, workforce housing, or employee housing. There's 3 separate categories.
Not to belabor this, but so those second 2 categories that you mentioned, workforce and employee, does not matter if they're year-round or not.
I don't think so, but am open to anybody else's opinion. Christy?
What would be different examples of workforce versus employee?
The Boys and Girls Club has employee housing that they're building, and the Dreamland has employee housing that they're building. But I don't know for sure in terms of occupancy if all of the employees who are intended to live there are here the full year. Workforce is the only thing that's currently under construction is Richmond's project, which are actual SHI eligible units. Does that clarify it?
Thank you.
Everybody good on that point? Is that Libby? Is that
Okay,
good?
so
Okay.
continuing on. Okay, then we get into landscaping. So let's just skip that for a second. Because then there may be more under, down there a little bit more, construction safety stand down. I just don't remember if there were comments there. Okay,
Rita?
so.
Rita has a question or a comment.
Yeah, I have a comment. Well, 2 actually. Are we making, because there is a landscape section there, but did we agree to make them 2 separate documents? That particular landscape section looks old anyways. But
Yeah, it is old because we didn't get the newer one separated out till today.
Okay.
And this hadn't.
Yeah.
Complicated.
Just to clarify that this.
Just disregard this the landscape part in this document. It's
Okay.
replaced with something else in a separate document.
My other thought was on the construction safety stand down, number 2, where each employee, contractor, vendor work on site shall sign a certificate. I'm just wondering if there's any way of involving homeowners in this as well, making sure not the every morning briefing on construction safety stand down, but at least making sure that homeowners have seen and signed off on the protocol that will be in place.
Through you, Madam Chair, on the application form that we developed, there is a signature for the homeowner to sign off on the COVID-19 regulations, saying that they understand them and that the workers will abide by them.
Okay. And are the fines, at the moment, the fines are only for the, we'll say the contractor? Yeah. And any of
because it's under their license
okay.
to make sure things comply. Is that correct, Leslie?
I think that's a better question for town council to answer, but I will add before he takes over that there may not be it would depend, I guess.
Council, do you want to weigh in on that?
Yes, unfortunately, I couldn't understand Leslie's response. She was coming a little bit in and out, but basically, I think the primary means of enforcement are going to be against the contractor, either by suspending the authorization to proceed or in some other way. I'm not sure, that this would give rise to enforcement against the property owner unless they were somehow responsible for the violations. The other area in which I could potentially see enforcement would be, if you had a group of workers who were not, practicing social distancing or safety standards, perhaps each one of them could be given a ticket. But I think the most likely scenario here is that all the enforcement would go through the contractor.
Jason?
I just wanted to get clarification on why do we need the homeowner's signature? Is that liability? It seems like it's one more step. They got to print it out, sign it, scan it, send it back. Is it, was this a town council suggestion? I'm just curious.
I think that the intent is that the homeowners are made fully aware that 4 people can be working on their job site and they have to comply with all of these regulations under our current circumstances. But someone else correct me if that's wrong. Rita?
Just to clarify, that's why I was asking. I was just thinking about, for these projects, making sure that homeowners who are off island and may not be fully up to speed with what we're doing, hopefully they're not holding any of their contractors to unrealistic deadlines if they can only have 4 people per site. So this gives a little bit of educational opportunity and leverage to the contractors to be able to explain some of the things they have to do and not put them in a position where they feel like they have to do things outside of protocol in order to meet the property owner's demands.
I think that that's a fair statement. I was going to say something else. I forgot what it was. I was going to say, I'm assuming that they can do some like an electronic signature through DocuSign or some kind of similar, so that it's not too cumbersome in terms of everybody in the world basically being at home without scanners necessarily. Matt, did you have a question? Matt, then Jason.
Well, actually 2. Where do painters fall in this? Is number 1. And number 2, we're talking 4 per property. Is that, we want to clarify, is that 4 and they change every day? Or is that 4 that are signed to one place? How will that be tracked? How will that be understood?
I think the intent is 4 on any given day, but maybe we should talk about that. And painters under this would only be on the year-round housing that needs to be fully completed. That wouldn't apply to a weather-tight structure, but except maybe exterior trim. But they could fall under the 1 worker provision if we decide to put that in. Thoughts, Jason? You had your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment what Rita said about giving any of these workers something in their hand to show their clients. They're getting a lot of pressure. I don't know if they need the signature. If we all agree, that's fine. I think if the building commissioner gives you an application, it's like, here's my parameters, and you send that to the client, that would be enough. But I agree with you, Rita. There needs to be some messaging and wording that everybody can give to their clients, so we're all on the same page.
Greg, did you have some legal thoughts? Oh, you're muted.
Am I still muted? Okay. So I was just going to respond to Matt's question, which I think was, does it have to be the same 4 people every time? And the answer is no. It just has to be 4 people. But each time you get a new person, they have to go through the stand-down procedure and acknowledge that they're going to follow the protocols. But you can have 4 different people every single day, as long as you only have 4 people at a time.
Is that a fair interpretation, everybody? Okay. Moving on.
Okay, so that,
Yeah, on that point,
Matt, go ahead.
then when we go to sort of safety protocols, we need to look at that more closely. If it were the same 3 or 4 guys, that's one thing. If they're changing every day, this thing can live for 2-3 days on some of these surfaces. Then we may have to make that protocol a little bit tighter.
Okay.
okay, so for now, no changes from that discussion, except the homeowner thing. All right, I think going to page 6 at the top, there's a section called General on-the-Job Procedures to Prevent Exposure and Limit the Transmission of the Virus. And I had made a note that there were a couple of issues from the April 15th board meeting requiring workers to remain on site for the duration of the workday, no going off site for lunch or errands or supplies, and requiring supplies to be delivered. So Greg has inserted those requirements, so they're in there now. Just FYI, a little bit in the middle of that section, it says all supplies and materials needed for the work shall be delivered to the site by the vendor. That was another delivery issue. And there was an issue about the off-island workers. No worker shall be commuting from off-island. We had a question about whether or not that's legal. Greg said that in his opinion, the requirement may exceed the emergency authority of the town because it may implicate constitutional rights for travel. You may wish to revisit this requirement.
Yes, Greg. And then I have a question or a comment too. Go ahead.
Would you want to ask your question first? Because I did do further work on this issue of authority to restrict travel that I can explain. But if you want to ask your question first, it might be.
My other thing was on the, whether people are allowed to leave for lunch or whether supplies can be picked up. I'd like to see it as more of a directive, like a best practices recommendation, that they bring food with them, or that the head contractor has food available in some way rather than leaving. But and same thing with the delivery, that large deliveries should be done whenever possible. But I don't think that if they need to run and pick up screws for something, they should be able to run to Marine Home Center and get them curbside. But so just more of a directive to minimize travel rather than they're going to get a ticket if they don't comply, especially when we're saying you have to only have your own vehicle. It's not going to be 5 people jumping in a truck to go to Cumbies for lunch. So that was my comment.
So on that point, then we probably want to look at those bullet points that were added yesterday, because the way it reads right now, it says employees shall not be permitted to leave the job site during the workday, except to return home at the end of their shift. Employees shall not be permitted on the job site unless they are on a shift. Employees shall leave the site and return home immediately after their shift ends. And employees shall bring any food and drink needed during the workday from home. Employees shall not be permitted to purchase food or drink from area vendors.
I'm not sure how everybody else feels about that, but I mean, even if people aren't working, they can go to Cumberland Farms and buy lunch right now. Rita?
I just had a comment. I don't know how feasible it is. It would be Roberto, but the possibility of allowing food trucks to go to site, kind of like Foods for Here. What was it? The Foods truck. Jason, you know about that. I mean, I don't know if restaurants want to do that, food trucks want to do that, but that might be one way to kind of get food to sites.
Jim?
Why would a worker have to go directly to his home after his shift?
Yeah, I kind of agree with you on that. I think it could be a directive to minimize traveling around. But I'm also thinking if you lived down the street, it might be best to go home for lunch and use the bathroom there rather than the porta potty in a job site. Matt?
Yeah, I think sort of first off, we're still under a 12-week a 12-day quarantine. I think that's everybody, or 12-week stay at home, 12-day stay at home. So we're all under that as we sit. And we're not supposed to be doing things that we're not supposed to be doing. So I think the intent is, at least my intent on some of these, and it goes completely against my business. I'd love them to all go out to lunch every day, but I don't know that that's a safe practice. I don't know that, and I've worked on plenty of job sites, and I have plenty of guys that I've worked with who, spend most of their day going back and forth to get coffee and pick up screws. So I think the goal is to have it tight to begin with. You get to the job site, you do your job, you eat lunch at the job, you go back home, you wash yourself, put your shoes by the door, wash your clothes. I mean, this is serious. If people, I think if it's just a suggestion, I'm not sure that people will take it seriously. I think even if it's an order, there's going to be a lot of slippage on it, but there'll be a lot more slippage if it's not, in there strongly.
Okay, Rita, then Christy.
I just want to comment on the food part, though, Matt, and I know what you mean, and I hear what James is saying as well. But some of the food things, some people don't have access to kitchens, so I think again trying to look at how people usually run their day and where they're going to be limited still, and making sure that people have access to they're not just dropped at a job site. Particularly again, people that don't have their own transport, they're not just dropped at a job site and left there and said, figure it out. So I think we just have to find that balance.
That was my concern as well, that I was going to mention, was a lot of people right now are having trouble getting access to food. And so being able to make food to bring to the job site might be difficult. So as much as we could make it a suggestion, I'm wondering how much we can enforce it, or could the contractors be responsible for providing lunch every day? I don't know if that's something that we can suggest, but I would be concerned about people not having access to food if they can't leave for lunch.
And do also keep in mind that we're only talking about 4 people per site. We're not talking about 24 workers. But I don't know. I just think it should be a directive. Greg?
So, I think that this discussion goes hand in hand with should we be limiting it to only workers who live on the island? Because I think that if you're going to open it up to workers coming from off island, then these provisions are much more important to have. Because if you have people coming from off island to do work, you only want them there for the purpose of doing the work, and then you want them leaving again. Because you have much less control over where they've been before. If we're only talking about people who live on the island, this may be of less concern, because these are people who are there anyway and may be going to these stores whether they are working or not. So with that, I did do some further research on the issue of whether you can limit this order to employees who only live on the island. And clearly this is a unique situation that we're in, and so I couldn't find any court cases that specifically address this issue. But what I did find is that both under the Massachusetts and the federal constitutions, there is a fundamental right of travel. And generally speaking, courts have found that even when there's a fundamental right, that fundamental right can take a back seat to reasonable regulation when it furthers a substantial governmental interest. And we've seen examples of cases in which even regulations of fundamental rights have been either put on hold or compromised during times of emergency, or to further an important governmental interest. So in this case, again, while we don't have conclusive precedent to look at, given the extreme state of emergency that we're under, and given the fact that your regulation is very narrow in scope, You're not saying no one can come to the island. You're not saying people can't travel back and forth. You're simply saying that this one particular type of business that we're allowing to open, while no others are allowed to be open, must do so by only using people who are already here. And that's only in effect for the duration of the emergency. So in my opinion, although, there is some risk of challenge, it's my opinion that you do have the authority to limit this work to only on-island workers.
Stephen?
That's a good point. Didn't we already do this in the original order, number 3, which expired April 6th? And I don't know why that April 6th date was in there, but that original order was very limiting to off-island people, unless you were specifically owned property here or was a resident or traveling for essential purposes. If we reinstated 3, I think it would solve that issue with what I think everybody is concerned here with, who we've all talked to, is their biggest concern are the workers traveling back to Nantucket once we put this phase back in. We're trying to protect our community. We want to open the door a little bit to see what's out there. But when you let the people from off island come, the workers who are coming from anywhere, Maine, New Hampshire, Boston, we're really putting at risk. And we want to keep that line, the flat line, as flat as pavement for our own people. So this is directed to, Greg. I was going to ask you this, but it's coming up already. So could we reinstate 3 with that stipulation in there? I mean, it sounds to me like you said we could do it. And that really, as a matter of public health, has to come from us. Thanks.
Three now. And what I think you're referring to is paragraph 4 says all travel on the island, including but not limited to travel on foot, bicycle, scooter, motorcycle, automobile, public transit, except essential travel and activities, is prohibited.
Yes.
So again, yes, I do think that this is within the authority of the town to do generally. Again, there is this fundamental right of travel, but that fundamental right, can yield to the greater good when there is a substantial public interest to be furthered. And I think it would be difficult to dispute that the situation here constitutes a substantial public interest in limiting travel for this small period of time. Again, a court may disagree, but my opinion and in my experience and having done this for a long time, I don't see this as being an unreasonable temporary restriction.
Jason?
It's easy. We're 26 miles out to sea, and the Board of Health's main priority here is public health and taking care of its community. Sorry, you want to go back to work from off island, but you can't right now until this emergency order is lifted. It's pretty simple for us to do, I think.
Can't we just incorporate that into this rather than confusing things all over again? Jason?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I think we're talking about 2 different things. Talking about travel on island when you're here. I believe that we have found over and over and over again that we cannot restrict travel to this island through the boat services or air service. So I think they're 2 different things. I believe, I hear what you're saying, Steve, but I don't, we can ask people, but there's no order that we can put in, or Board of Health or Select Board or anyone to stop people from coming here regardless, except to not have any work, period. Are we talking about 2 different things here, Greg?
Greg, you're muted.
Oh, sorry. Okay, so order number 3 is much more extensive than what we're talking about now. What we're talking about now is opening up a limited amount of construction and whether or not off-island workers should be allowed to come onto the island to do that work. Order number 3 looks like it was essentially a much more restrictive, almost quarantine of the entire island. And I do think that that is a different issue, which would probably warrant its own discussion.
Yeah, order number 3 went in prior to the state putting a stay-at-home order in. And I'm hoping we're going to get to a point where we can just get everything a little bit more aligned with the state. Right now, kind of our only differences are these construction and landscaping issues. And it's people are getting so confused at this stage. I mean, I thought we were going towards a directive. Well, one, if it's 1 to 4 workers, that eliminates how many people would want to come from off island. But a directive, if they are going to come from off island, that they're going to stay on island and for the duration of the job, was, I thought, what we're trying for. And hopefully that they would self-isolate if they had any concerns about their health. Maybe the hospital wants to weigh in on that. Matt? Matt, you were
Real quick, I'll just, Greg made a really good point in his, I think his point of, if we do it one way, that, with, strict rules for the job site, then maybe people are traveling. And if we do it another way, we should consider that. I'm not in agreement that it's illegal because you can't travel. If I walk through I have some friends who are like constitutional scholars and say we're not allowed to do it. And I always argue with them, okay, I walk through a nuclear waste site and I get infected. I'm not allowed to go and bring that all through downtown Nantucket. That if I knowingly do that, I'm not allowed to do that. So you're allowed to protect, like Steve was saying, you're allowed to protect your community, and we need to be able to do that. If we're not going to, if we're going to allow travel, we're going to open the floodgates to travel. None of this will make any difference in 3 months. So we have to be really careful, and unless we're doing tracing and, and doing testing, I think we've got to be really careful with this.
I think it would be good for the hospital to weigh in at this point because, I mean, they were pretty clear yesterday on testing is ramping up and that they are prepared and ready for a little bit more of a mix to happen here and to monitor how that goes because the virus isn't completely disappearing. Dr. Pearl?
Yes, hi there, Dawn. I'm the only one here left, I think. So the scale and scope that this discussion started with was having job sites populated by several people, 1 to 4, with appropriate distancing, masking, and hygiene measures. And that does not seem to me to be a risk to public health in any major way. And it would be a great benefit to our community who relies on this kind of work. So that seemed to be an appropriate step for you to take as the boards of health and select people. And now morphing into whether people should come back and forth off the island, I think is another question altogether. And whether they should ride their bikes down the bike path is another question altogether, the travel of the Section 3 that you were talking about. So as far as I am not a specialist in COVID-19 by any stretch, but from what I've seen and learned and read and experienced, starting off with these proposals of limiting workers who are at a very low chance of bringing danger and harm to our community. They live here on the island. They will be following these guidelines that you've presented. We're all for that opening of the island in that way, but this transient people coming back and forth is our major risk. And that's the risk that will bring the virus back to light here. And although we can test people, we don't have a treatment for this disease. specifically. So I thought, you know, it's small steps. Just start with some very small steps, and we can measure the effect of that in some way, but only because people will then be sick.
I also think that we'll be relying on the messaging from the Builders Association and so forth, that if this gets done and there's a problem and there's a lot of people traveling, then it's not going to continue. It will be closed off again.
Right.
So, you know, I think that we have to be careful about constitutional violations, and I don't want to really get into a situation like the Outer Banks where they're being sued and spending town money on that. But I think that we need to look for the community to be responsible on this and protect the public health of the island and how they're managing their construction sites.
Yeah, and I'm a little concerned about the health and safety of the workers on the job sites. If they're there by themselves and they get injured and nobody knows that they're injured and they don't have a partner with them, that concerns me. And then the lack of hygiene, you know, there's no bathrooms with hand washing, and I know they can get the alcohol washes, but you know, I don't want to be punitive to the workers so that they can't eat and they can't use a bathroom and they might be alone in a dangerous situation.
Well, that begs a question of, do you think that our limitation, aside from the ones with the extra provisions that were 4 are allowed, should be no more than 2 people, as long as they're there in separate vehicles?
Well, that's beyond my purview too, except that I'd be worried that they would try to take more on than they safely should because they're by themselves and going up ladders and, you know, dangerous things. As we know, the workplace is a very dangerous place, and now that no one has been working, we're not seeing the injuries that we would normally see at the hospital.
Thank you. Does anybody have any questions for Dr. Pearl? Additional thoughts on this? Greg?
Just some additional thoughts. Don mentioned the Outer Banks case. You know, I think this is, at this point, far different than that. You know, the Outer Banks case, they closed the area and wouldn't let anyone on at all. And, you know, we haven't taken that step. At this point, we're saying, you know, we're limiting a certain practice to a certain group of people. And I think that that's justifiable under the circumstances. I think the difficulty is in that if you were to open this up to off-island workers, it becomes very difficult to enforce the requirement that they only go to their job site and back. Because how are you going to know that they're the person that's in the Cumberland Farms or, you know, at the gas station or going someplace else? And so, you know, I think from an enforcement perspective, it's probably easier to enforce a no off-island worker rule than it would be to enforce a you must stay on the job site rule.
Just wondering on the enforcement part, how would that be enforced?
Well, so, you know, if you were to see someone who you knew to be a worker from off island and they were someplace other than a job site, you could either issue them a ticket under the non-criminal disposition procedure, or in an extreme case, I believe that these orders can be interpreted as you're a trespasser if you're someplace you're not authorized to be. And if a trespasser remains someplace they're not authorized to be, and they refuse to move on after being warned, they can ultimately be subject to arrest.
Okay, just to be devil's advocate on that. So if I come off the ferry and I look like I might be going to do construction work, someone's going to stop me and give me a ticket. I mean, I just like, let's just make sure that we know what we're talking about here.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing, right? I mean, all of this enforcement is subject to some level of discretion. And I'm certainly not advocating for, you know, arresting people as they come off the ferry. But, I think if you had a rule that says that job sites can be open using on-island workers only, and you see a group of individuals, carrying large bags of tools with them, and then, going to a job site, I think it would be reasonable to assume that they came from off island to do the work. And that would likely be grounds to, question the contractor, where are your workers from?
Rita, and then Jason.
I'm a little uncomfortable with the sort of trying to ID people and what their profession is coming off the ferry. Without any sort of major transgressions against people's constitutional rights, I do think that if that is our biggest sort of vulnerability is people coming from off island, I think we should. I would agree with Steve and Matt. I think we should explore how we can limit that ferry traffic. But I was thinking that we were talking about having a daily log, and I just am wondering if it's possible to, if we have a daily log of the workers, if the contractor has 30 people that are going to be working for him, 4 at a time, he submits everyone's names and addresses, and they should be on-island addresses. I don't know if that's a better way to do it. If they don't have an on-island address, then they don't. So we don't have to be sort of looking at people and trying to figure out if they're workers or not. But that was my understanding. I may have misunderstood. I thought we were having a log for the purpose of contact tracing. And I don't know if that's a way to sort of monitor where people are coming from or limiting.
Jason, and then Jim.
Yeah.
To
echo what Rita said in the beginning there. I don't, we would have to do this differently. If I see racial profiling, accidental, implicit bias coming out of anybody we think is a worker, someone drives by and sees somebody, they think they're coming off the boat, but they're not. There's a lot of aggression and fear out there. I just don't like this. No off-island workers, and we're going to cite you or arrest you. I would rather not have any jobs being done for the next 2 weeks until May 4th. I think we're talking about, 20 some jobs, 4 people max. Not a lot of people are going to come. I think this is our opportunity to educate and be leaders of Nantucket and asking people not to come here, whether you said, Dom, through the Builders Association and doing a mass messaging of please don't come here right now unless you have this permit. But I don't like this open that we can arrest or cite. That bothers me quite a bit.
Greg? Sorry, Jim. Let's just let Greg respond to that and then go to you.
Yeah, so maybe there's a middle ground here. And instead of prohibiting off-island workers, what if we say something more vague like preference shall be given to on-island workers? And then we keep in place the requirements that the workers can't leave the job site during the day.
Jim, did you want to?
I think what Rita said is the way to go. Every contractor knows the guys that work for him. It's very simple for him to take the people that work for him, give their name and their addresses, and if you have to give them to the building inspector or to whoever's going to look at these jobs, he knows who the guys that are going to work for him, and he simply just uses those guys. You just don't hire anyone else. If you're only limiting to 4 people on a job, it can't be very hard to keep 4 Nantucket people in your crew on that job.
Christy?
I was just going to comment that if there is a way to put a preference for locals, I think that's something that we should move forward with. I think ultimately it's going to be on the contractors to kind of do what's right. And if they're going to be bringing people from off island, then they're going to be putting our community at risk and ultimately end up shutting down this slow easement. So I think it's in their best interest to only use on-island workers, and hopefully that message will get through. But I think it's going to be on all of us to self-regulate and not necessarily have a police officer at the boat, but report it when you see it, or encourage your friends to only use locals. I think it would be really hard to support opening up this industry when so many of us are not working and have all these people come from off island. I just think that's going to be a really tough pill to swallow. So anything that we could do to support hiring locally would be the message I'd want to use.
Yeah, I like the idea of the contractor logging the 4 names of who will be working at a job site at any given time, and yeah, and giving them the directive like you need to keep it local so we don't have this mix, because that's where the virus exposure can come from. Oh, Steve?
Yeah, I would agree with you and Christy and Greg. That was a good, I like that word, the preference. It's I would have no problem with that wording being put in there.
Matt?
And again, I think if we make it too loose, I think people are not gonna do it. You know, I think if it's a preference, I think there'll see some people say, well, I didn't, that may not follow it. It may be longer than 2 weeks. This may be, the state may go longer, and it'll be, we'll be extending this. It's in the outer, it's different than the Outer Banks because we're not completely saying no. I think, in the job site part, I worked for a guy who, these guys are working, they're all adults. If you say you have to bring your lunch, they're going to find a way to bring lunch. I worked for someone, he didn't let me go to lunch every day. We took our half hour and went right back to work. That's, so if we're going to open it up, then we should be not scared about being tough on those. So.
Okay. Jason?
I just want to make clear, I don't think we're opening this up. It just, Matt saying it's just opening it up sounds like we're opening up the floodgates. We're talking about 20 some permitted jobs. I know we're not gotten to landscaping yet, up to 4 people, not necessarily going to use 4 people. And then I think if a building commissioner sees that a job only needs 1 or 2 people, he doesn't allow 4. I'm thinking about, 4 or 6 weeks from now, if the governor does push this another month, and our goal is to try to head towards the state order. And Dr. Pearl, you can correct me if I'm wrong. Eventually, there's going to be people coming here, and I know we need to hold off a little longer. What's going to be different in 3 to 4 weeks, Dr. Pearl? Maybe the cities will be.
Yep, I think the surge has not yet occurred in Boston, so they're still going up every day, although very gradually, and everybody is feeling a little more comfortable, and New York is in a much better condition. So I think we were hoping that the surge in Boston and the rest of Massachusetts would be quieting down, and the more time that passes, I think the more control we have over this infection. So it is inevitable. There's no doubt that this will open up and the island will open to some degree. But one step at a time would be the best way, of course, rather than opening the gates. So this is a first step.
Yeah, that's what I like about this. We're still more restrictive than the state. We see how these kind of provisions go over the next 2 weeks. I don't think it is opening any kind of floodgates. The projects are limited. Matt?
Yeah, I guess mine isn't talking about opening the floodgates to construction. My concern really is more down the future. I'm not as sort of trusting of Boston maybe as some of you guys, and I don't know if my goal is to be aligned with Boston, because I'm not sure that they're going to do the right things for Nantucket in 2 weeks or a month and a half, and we may have to deal with this. I think the travel issue is going to be the biggest issue, and we haven't even talked about other industries, but I think the churn, the 10 or 20% churn of our entire population every week, we're going to have those discussions. If this thing is still with us, we're going to have those discussions. And I think aligning ourselves with travel, not being not being willing to oppose, Boston, if need be, I think we have to be very careful.
Okay, I think we're starting to go a little bit broader than just talking about these limited building provisions. And no matter what, for any policy we're talking about, we need to consider where we are at with our numbers and what the situation is, which we'll be monitoring every day. right? Can we keep going through the order?
Sure, and then maybe when we're done with it, we can just figure out what's changing and what's not changing. So that was the off-island work.
Malcolm, sorry, Malcolm. Malcolm. Malcolm, you're muted.
We're going on, I'm not sure to resolve all that last discussion paragraph. Those, we kind of wandered off on travel and so forth.
Do you have thoughts on
Well,
how to tie that up?
I'll give you my thoughts. I don't think we concluded anything. I think I like the word of preference to Nantucket workers. I think that's simpler. If it doesn't work out, we'll deal with it. And as Diane said, I have some concern about, 1 to 4 people, one person at a job site. That bothers me. I don't know how to resolve it because there may be injury. And I think it's restrictive that we say they can't go to Cumberland Farms to get a sandwich or a screw. I think that's ridiculous. I mean, I can walk down to a takeout place and get my soup tonight. I don't see why a worker can't do that. Those are my thoughts.
Thank you. I mean, I would personally be open to on other jobs, as long as they register and they go in private vehicles, that there could be 2 people. But I'm not sure how everybody else thinks about that. Rita?
I feel like the people we've been hearing from are people who do a lot of solo work already. I think we can keep it at 1. I understand Dr. Pearl's issue, but I think a lot of the trades that want to have the 1 person per job site rule already do a lot of solo work. If they're painters, hopefully they're not getting up on ladders by themselves anyways. So I don't know if there's a need on our behalf to go further with it right now. It seems what we've been hearing is, I'm a carpenter, I'm a painter, I'm a one-man show, and I can get back to work safely. So I don't know if we need to extend it.
Yeah, I've also heard the 1 person who operates a machine for like excavation, that they feel pretty safe that they could go run a machine. Oh, Greg?
So I just wanted to say that there's nothing in this document that specifically addresses the 1 worker situation. And really this document is not well tailored to that. This document is really aimed at opening up bigger projects to a certain limited extent and making sure that those projects take the proper precautions. I think if we're going to start talking about opening up other jobs for single individual workers, that's probably a different discussion.
I think that came up because this was in one of the prior Board of Health orders that got altered. And a lot of people are asking about this particular provision, and then how it also ties into the landscaping provisions. And that's why it's come up a few times.
Okay.
Matt?
Yeah, from a policy perspective, I'd rather start with 1 person, 1 job, and then move to the big jobs. I think it's coming up because kind of common sense says, those are the least dangerous, and then, at least, and then move up the scale.
But you're not suggesting we would still do the 4 workers on these very specific items where they can't do these things can't be done alone.
Yeah, no, and I'm fine with that, but not if, I don't want to put the 1 worker aside, because it's not in this document. I think that's, and I think politically it's sort of in buy-in from the community, it would be a mistake, because a lot of people are saying, oh great, we're opening for these larger things and I still can't go and paint, a wall in this house and finish this house. I just think we need to have those happen at the same time.
Rita?
I'm wondering if that's something, the 1 worker, 1 site, though, is something that we could look at our meeting next week, because I feel like we sort of tried it once, we backtracked. We haven't really discussed, we sort of acknowledged there were loopholes and concerns, but we haven't really discussed, and I don't know that we can really hash out what those concerns were here today without some guidance from Roberto or from Leslie or for someone about how that could work safely. So I don't know that we can do it today as part of this document, but I think I'd be interested in hearing what people had to say about how we could do that safely, because there is a demand from it, and I think it fits into what Gary Shaw told us was look for the most, I guess, the most safe ways to sort of introduce work back into the community.
Matt? Matt? You're muted.
I think we could, am I better? Here we go.
Yeah.
I think we could do it pretty easily. We make them sign the same paper that we're asking the larger jobs to sign, and they say what they're doing and where they're working, and it's one person, and we're done. I think it's relatively simple, and I don't want to put it off. I don't want to, move the speed of government and put it off for a week or two while people are home and struggling. I just think,
Yeah, I mean, one thing that I've been talking to people, and I mean, there's so many single people who have said that they have stuff to go do. That's super safe because there will be no exposure to anybody else, and hopefully they won't be taking on things that they shouldn't be doing alone. But we're also economically, and I know that we're talking about public health. People are coming up on their May 1st deadline of making mortgage payments and paying rent, and there's a lot of other potential public health issues coming into play as the economics get that much more dire. Matt?
Yeah, just real quick, following up with what Don said, Sheila has a knitter. She's the chief medical examiner in a large city, and the bodies are stacking up. But now what she's seeing is that it's COVID related. It's suicides and violence, where family members have beat their wives to death or killed their kids. I mean, and I'm not saying that's happening here, but there's a lot, there's a lot of suicide. There's a lot of really bad things happening because of sort of the offshoots of this. It isn't just the disease itself now. The people on the front lines are dealing with other aspects. And so I think it's important that we recognize that and do as much as we can to avoid those, sort of bad things here.
And a lot of that is outside of our control. We're governed by the orders throughout the state, but these two industries that we're talking about are under our control because we're more restrictive. And we're being told by the hospital that we can take, what Gary said yesterday is take the brakes off a little bit and see how it goes. I mean, we've done an amazing job. 14 days of no cases is, I think, a pretty fantastic accomplishment for Nantucket. Jason?
Madam Chair, if you will, and if Mr. Visco thinks okay, I think we should continue to go on what this weather tiding, structure looks like. And then once we finish that, we can, do we feel comfortable allowing 1 to 4 people to finish these specific jobs? And that's it for construction, get through landscaping. And then kind of back to what Rita said, at the end of this, we can talk about 1 or 2 people at a job site. What do we need to work on for a future meeting?
Okay, Libby, do you want to keep taking us through?
Sure. So we'll maybe come back to the delivery and off-island situation. Okay, that's Leslie, you have a comment about down at the bottom of page 8 about the appeal process. Does it all go to the Board of Health, Building Commissioner, fine, stop work? How will all that work? It should be in this document so there's a clear path for staff and the public to follow and understand. I don't know, Greg, if you have thoughts about that.
Greg?
Thank you. So I did not anticipate there being an appeal process. Certainly, if you were to issue someone a ticket, there's a statutory appeal process for that. Were you talking about appeals on the enforcement side, or appeals on someone who is thinking that they qualify to do work but don't?
Leslie?
So I was thinking about enforcement in terms of if someone applies to do work and the building commissioner denies their request, then where do they appeal that? Does it go to the Board of Health? Because it's a Board of Health order. Also with, any COVID related job shutdown, if the person feels aggrieved by that the job shouldn't have been shut down, where does that appeal go? Again, I would think to the Board of Health because it's a Board of Health order. The fines, that may have a separate process, but I think that needs to be spelled out in here so there's no, interpretation on the fly happening, and so everyone has clear expectations about how the process works.
Greg?
Yes. Okay, I understand. I'll put that in the enforcement section. I'll add a paragraph or two. I agree. I think that the appeal should be to the Board of Health, and I have some language from some of the other orders that I can slide in there.
Thank you. I think, does anybody have any comments or issues with that? I think that was just clarifying. Libby?
Okay, that I think was it. So just to cover the construction part of this, I have jotted down the following. The distribution issue, we covered how that's pretty much going to happen. The deliveries and the pickups, I don't know if we totally closed that out, but something I jotted down was perhaps there is a designated person at the site for items that are needed at the site besides things that can be delivered by the vendor. The year-round housing issue we've resolved, I believe. The one worker allowance remains outstanding. March 10th date issue, we're going to change that to March 20th and clarify that this is only existing work, nothing new. And its applicability of that date is to what specific type of work is already started and what type of work is already started. The number of workers on the site issue with respect to building permit or property, we're going to make that the property. Partially framed structures, not houses. The other one worker per site issue is outstanding. Residential construction, Board of Health. The property owner has to sign the construction safety stand down. The workers, I think we explained that. The off-island travel is outstanding. Rita brought up something about a log, contact tracing log kind of a thing. That's not anywhere in here now. So I'm not clear if we're going to put something in. And the appeals process, as was just discussed, will be added by Greg. So there may be some things to revisit here. I don't know if you want to do that today or not. With respect to, or do you want to go to landscaping? No.
Let's go through landscaping and then we'll come back and tie up those remaining issues on what direction people want to take. Does that make sense?
All right, so with respect to sorry.
I'm just going to say the overlap, might give some clarity on how we want to handle things. Go ahead.
Okay, with respect to landscaping, what everybody should be looking at, hopefully everybody has it, I believe, is what Jeff Carlson sent today at 11:59. It's the subject of the email is revised landscape protocols, and the document is called 10 of Nantucket Landscape Protocols version 7. And I think Jeff can speak on this, but I think what he's done is removed the landscaping component to the order and just take all that out and put it in its own document. So it's a separate order entirely. And I think at the board meeting last Wednesday, we left the landscaping that the board wanted it to be 2 separate orders, so that'll be happening. And Jeff and Rita, I think, with maybe input from others, we're going to try to revise the allowable activities. So maybe they can take us through that. And the other stuff, other wording in here will be similar, I think, but I don't know if it's identical to the construction safety protocols. It still says construction safety stand down. Jeff, I don't know if we want the word construction in there still. And I see you did add something in here about a daily log. So maybe that phrase can be put into the other construction order. Each company shall also keep a daily log for every employee listing each property worked on by each employee. This log shall be made available by request of the Board of Health. And I don't know if the other components to this, the enforcement and the safety protocols require any kind of modification because it's landscaping, not construction. It might be uniform. So I don't know if you or Rita want to take us through the allowable activities, how those have changed since Wednesday.
Jeff?
Yeah, I'm happy to kind of walk through those and some of the changes that we went through, and thanks for the catch on a couple of those. So after kind of some discussions and some summaries that we put together, we moved some stuff around a little bit, and we've created kind of this initial list of allowable activities to kind of get open and get plants unwrapped and protected, and some of the greenhouse didn't change. One of the additions was the irrigation system commissioning related to water turn-ons, and there was some concern to that for making sure that people can water plants. And then we did have one exemption that was in there previously for one worker on site to not really have restrictions, and then created this new category of what I'm calling secondary activities, which include things like mowing of lawns, mulching, fertilizers, kind of those secondary activities for kind of initial maintenance and care. But having that to be authorized by the Board of Health separately after at least kind of 1 week of the initial tryout to make sure that things are working okay and people are compliant, and to also get kind of that regular review and check-in for how things are going before we kind of take that next step into some of the more maintenance style activities for crews that are the crews are limited in landscaping by 2 individuals right now. So to get 2 people doing that work would take that secondary authorization of the Board of Health. And then one of the other new additions was what Libby brought up. We do have in number 6 in the general protocols, we are going to require that each company keep a daily log for each employee for the properties they visited, and that can be made available by request. So if there is an issue, we'll know all the properties that any of the employees were at, what day they were there, who they may or may not have been with if they were by themselves, but a little bit more of a check in case something does come up. And then to scroll through, I don't believe we changed any of the real protocols that were already included in the original draft. So I'm happy to take questions or comments if people have them, but that's kind of the real basic run through.
Rita?
Yeah, just quickly before making a couple comments on where we're at with the landscaping, I think it might be a good idea to consider a log for the construction, especially if we're only doing preference for island. I think in terms of contact tracing, from what I've heard, that being quite difficult. If we do have off-island workers coming, then knowing who they are, when they were different places, and who they might have come in contact with might be valuable, and I think a fairly easy addition to the construction plan. Yeah, Jeff and I did talk yesterday, and this revised document is, again, mostly a reordering of things to have a little bit more, I think, again, minimizing some of the work initially and then letting it off a little more slowly. I I really still am not comfortable with this. I think this is better than it was before, but I'm really struggling. This past Wednesday was the first time we as a board have heard that we can stop being cautious. For the past month, the hospital has made it very clear that this was, before we even had cases here, that we were to be very cautious and take this very seriously, which is why we put in our stay at home before we even had cases here. And it's why we've got more restrictions on the construction and the landscaping. So I think if we're trying to get landscapers back to work, I think the more responsible way to do that is the one person per work site. I feel pretty strongly that the protocol is great, but when you're in the field trying to keep your hands clean, your hands away from your face, your mask on. If someone needs help lifting something into the back of a truck, you go and you help them. So I'm dubious that we're really going to be able to, with 2 people per job site at the start, just snap our fingers and start doing things differently than we have done them. Or when in places where you don't have bathrooms, you're not supposed to be leaving the job site, and you don't have hand washing facilities easily there. I just don't think we're going to be able to do it. So I am concerned, and I can't do the same about turn that the hospital has done, and I think some of the other board members have. So I still don't think this is ideal. And I think that, again, realizing that if Jeff has 300 people on his email list that are going to be contacted with this information, and that's 2 people per job site, that's 600 people back out working. And we've also been told by the hospital that this is a numbers game, and the fewer people in contact with each other means fewer transmissions, opportunities for transmissions, and fewer cases. So when I looked at this as a numbers game, that seemed like a lot of numbers. And I'm okay with being overly cautious. If other people aren't, that's fine. But I'm still concerned. And I think the thing is that I know a lot of the people that are going back to work very personally. Some are going back unwillingly. Some are going back willingly because they want the work, and realizing that, as Gary said yesterday, people are going to get sick. So we're testing out how this works on people that we all know. So I'm still uncomfortable with it. I don't think that we're necessarily finding the right balance between economic health and public health on this one. So it's better, but I'm still uncomfortable with it.
But you are comfortable with one person.
I'm comfortable enough with one person. A couple of, the 3 things that I think that I would like to see added, 2 of which would happen regardless of whether it's one person or two people. I am more comfortable with one person to a site for the next week, just to kind of ease our way back into this. I think it would be important for just generally to have some kind of, for construction and landscaping, have a number of people can call if they feel like they're in a situation. There's a lot of great employers out there, and there's some that aren't necessarily taking care of their employees, and their employees don't feel like they have recourse. So I think if there's a number for people to call when they feel like they're on a job site where protocol isn't being followed, I think that would be key for taking care of employee health. I also think an acknowledgement from the homeowner. Jason, to your point, I think you're right in terms of adding more sort of bureaucracy to these things, particularly when people are at home and maybe don't have access to scanners and printers. For HDC, I know that when I need to be made an agent for a project, I can get an email from a client saying that they're allowing me to be an agent for a project to sign the HDC documents. And I think acknowledgement from homeowners that they understand that landscapers are being required to follow this procedure, because already homeowners are putting pressure on landscapers. And again, this gives them a tool to educate the property owners. And I think if it's an email acknowledgement, that's fine, but I think bringing in the homeowners is important.
So maybe some of those things can align. Helene and then Malcolm.
Has there been any discussion about when work is going to commence? I know we see date to be determined, but has there been discussion?
We need to discuss that. There will be a lag just in terms of getting paperwork together.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Yeah.
What I kind of heard from the hospital yesterday was that they were ready. I mean, originally we talked about a week out, but I also know that it will take a number of days just to get paperwork in order.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Malcolm? Malcolm, you're still muted.
I'm trying. Thank you. Thank you. One thing that Rita said, I think we have to address and concerns me, and that has to do with the rights of our workers. I mean, a worker not feeling safe going back to the job, that person should not be penalized. That person has the right to say, I don't feel safe. Is there something legally we can do to protect the worker? In other words, if a worker says, even in construction or gardening or whatever it is, I don't feel safe because of this virus and I don't want to work. Can we protect those people from being disciplined or fired?
I've asked actually for an opinion from council on that issue because I am of the opinion that in this crisis, people should not be forced to go back to work that are collecting unemployment if they don't feel safe to do so, or also under the fact that some of them have some significant childcare issues with all the schools and daycares being closed. And they don't fall under essential like medical workers who can get special daycare provisions. But I think that Greg is working on that. Maybe he wants to say something, and then Matt had his hand up.
Yes, just briefly, I was not able to get a conclusive answer on that in time for this call, but I am aware of the concern, and we will provide an opinion as to what the rights of workers are and what the authority of the town would be in order to protect workers if there's anything above and beyond what the state already does. However, I would say that having we are requiring for job sites that there be a placard up about the social distancing requirements. I can't see why we couldn't also put a phone number in there for someone to report to the building department if those requirements are not being met at a particular site.
How does Matt, go ahead.
Yeah, my understanding is there are some of the rights were extended or increased, and there's a document that all businesses are supposed to post, so that's number one. And
I think Christy has some information on this issue.
Yeah, I think she will. And on unemployment insurance, it is a little murky. If a job is an essential job and the person just doesn't feel comfortable, that's still unclear from my understanding. But it isn't unclear if they are taking care, if they have COVID, they're taking care of somebody with COVID, then it is clear that they can stay. But on the other one, I don't think it's clear yet.
Christy, and then Rita.
Yeah, I was just going to say, there is the new Family First coronavirus, I forget the whole thing, it's FFCRA, that expanded paid medical leave and family leave. So if you're unable to work because of daycare, you can apply for it. I was actually trying to get a hold of Megan Blair-Valero before this to get confirmation, and it's a maybe if people would be able to apply, but at least something to look forward to or look into. I do think that there are concerns. I know a lot of us received messages of people being scared to go back to work and also not having access to work if there's only one person per vehicle, and how they would get to job sites via bike or the NERDA. And so just trying to think about how employers could be flexible at this time to have people that are willing to go back to work start, and then be considerate of others who maybe want to take a couple of weeks before returning.
Rita, did you have another comment?
I had a question, and it's a follow-on from Matt's. I think it's a question for Greg. I think when I reread through some of the state's rules, I don't think landscaping, it didn't seem like they were classifying landscaping as essential, but rather that it was something that could be done with social distancing for the most part. So I don't know that Matt, to some of the things you were talking about, some limitations on essential workers, having to come back to work or whatever it is. My question is whether that applies to landscaping, because I don't think it's actually considered essential.
Yeah, I think it applies to all businesses. The act that Christy is talking about, strangely, it applies to people with 500 or fewer employees. So it doesn't apply to the large ones. I don't know why, but I could guess. But I think it applies to all employees. and it's supposed to be posted at a job site, and they're supposed to know that these are available to them now.
There is information on the state site in regard to this, but it's not 100% clear. But it does talk about if you feel unsafe for valid reasons. Greg?
Yes. So again, I can't speak on the unemployment issue, but landscapers are listed as essential workers under construction-related activities for purposes of the state order. Under Nantucket's order, as it's currently written, that work is not allowed to proceed.
Okay. I mean, the Builders Association did have some suggestions about something like a whistleblower hotline in regard to and any kind of people breaking these rules, essentially, and employees feeling like they're put in a precarious situation. And maybe they would even be part of organizing that. Jason?
Yeah, just thank you, everyone. This is, I know it's long and it's convoluted, but it's important. This conversation that we're having, trying to dig through all this. You know, for the last couple of weeks, I've said that I want us to start planning some type of system in some type of phased, measured reentry, and we're doing it. But I didn't really worry about a date until the hospital would, help us, guide us through that. And now they're saying that they are okay with a low risk situation worker for 1 or 2 people. And so that gives me a little more comfort for us to have 1 or 2 people at job sites. And we can, whether that's construction or landscaping or Tyler or whatever. So that's where I'm at. Whether that starts the 27th or the 4th, somewhere around there, I'm fine with. The Board of Health will obviously rule on that. That's just kind of where I'm at now. I'm comfortable with landscaping with 1 to 2 people. But I think what the things that Rita's bringing up about people not feeling comfortable and being pressured into it because they're fearful of losing their jobs, that's a real thing, and I'm glad we're talking about it.
So where are we on moving forward on these things? I'm going to have to go go plug in my computer because it's going to die in a minute. So I'm going to leave you guys for a second. Rita, can you chair?
I guess where we're at is really if any members of either board have comments, additions, concerns on the landscaping section or the landscaping document. Christy?
I know with the construction, the Builders Association was really involved. What was the involvement, or is there an organization that was involved with landscaping?
Say Jeff or Jason could possibly understand, or sorry, they definitely understand. Fill us in.
Sure. So we definitely worked with a group of landscapers to kind of review and put these together. I'm sure, as you guys can imagine, as soon as we started putting them together, comments I know I got a lot for ideas and thoughts and from people just randomly emailing in. But we did have a number of calls, and then I also did a little bit of self-research and looked at whatever guidelines the state had put together. Some of the recommendations from places like the CDC for activities have been put together. Definitely tried to kind of hive mind it as much as possible to assemble something that we felt was at least good to kind of kick off the discussion. I don't know if Jason feels any differently or has any more he'd like to add because he was directly involved, but that was kind of my experience with it.
Thanks.
I can just add in really quick. The Zoom calls that I was on with 10 to 12 landscapers were mostly owners of bigger jobs. It wasn't smaller companies or individual gardeners or anything. That's where I heard I got most of the feedback.
Back.
I had feedback from some of the guys who are a bit smaller, and they shared some concerns, and they had some concerns like Rita is talking about. So I think it was sort of a cross section. I think the idea of the log for construction and for is really important. And I think the dedicated phone line, and I wouldn't leave that up to, the builders or landscapers to monitor themselves. I think the town should have a dedicated phone line that people can call, and we could, monitor and make sure things are addressed in a timely manner. I think, this is sort of new territory. I think we need to be prepared for it.
Okay, so I mean, I think we've got some decision points. Hold on. Oh, go ahead, Steve.
Can I just make one more comment looking at the landscape thing where they, under the exemptions on this new one, where landscaping work, where the work is limited to only one worker on site? Isn't there any reason why we can't put that in the construction part too, which we were basically talking about earlier?
That was what I was referring to when we talked about the overlap, that maybe we could have the same provisions in there. Rita?
I am okay with that. I just going back to some of the conversations we had before, I think the difference being that for the construction side, we're talking about being inside versus being outside. So when you've got one person, and those are some of the questions we were receiving about the one person per job site is, can I have my plumber come in for 2 hours and then can I have my tiler come in after him? And you wouldn't have that in landscaping as much. Whereas in the construction, it just seemed a little more convoluted. And then you're inside, so you're talking about disinfecting areas. Do you do that sanitizing? So I think that's what, just really as a record keeper, that's what was discussed before. I would like to see the one person per job site go forward, but I think that was a legitimate concern from before.
I think that there should be language added that it says something like on any given day with proper sanitation being done in between. Would something like that make sense, Greg? This is on the construction piece. The landscaping's outdoors, so it's a little bit different.
Unmute. Sorry about that.
Hey, Greg, before you start, there's a lot of individual work that's done on outside of buildings besides inside. So,
well, maybe for interior work, there's proper sanitation done in between. But I think that it needs to be addressed, that whole piece where it's like how many workers can rotate through a place on any given day.
So yeah, I definitely think that we can, if we don't have something to that effect in here already, we could certainly make it a requirement. I think that a requirement like that would also apply to sites that have more than one worker. So for example, if you have a site, maybe you have 4 workers there in the morning, and then you change shifts and you have another 4 workers there in the afternoon, there probably should be some sort of sanitation or sanitizing in between, in between shifts. So I do think we can put something to that effect in here.
I'm pretty sure I saw wording for this in the Vineyard draft. I don't know if that'll be valuable, and I don't remember it exactly, but I do think there was wording there that seemed reasonable.
Okay.
Okay. So, Dr. Pearl?
Yeah, I'm sorry, Don, to interrupt, but I have to go to another meeting at 3, and I just wanted to be available to answer any questions at this point, if anyone has any before I left.
Anyone have any thoughts? Jason?
Dr. Pearl, would you be comfortable with something like that we're talking about going into effect on the 27th or May 4th?
Yes, and I think the reason is this. We have a low level of COVID-19 on the island, which we all agree with because we don't have a lot of sick people and we have not had a lot of positive tests, and we haven't had any for 14 days. The people in Boston that we speak to, the epidemiologists and this other physicians there are just amazed. They haven't, they're shocked that our community can be this isolated and this have such a low volume. I know that I wear a mask at work inside with 30 or 40 people every day. So we wear masks, everyone's wearing a mask. We keep our distance from each other. And we think that the workplace eventually is going to be just that for everybody. Everyone's masked, everyone stays distant, and that's very safe as it can be, and still return to work. And we think that the collateral damage of people not working is very serious in a community with the violence and the drugs and alcohol and poverty and suicide and depression and stress that not working results in. So we have tried to come up with the compromises and we can't stay isolated until a vaccine is developed a year and a half from now. So we are in this condition on Nantucket that we can't stay the way we are. That's not viable. And we have to move forward. And we think that the safest possible way to move forward is with masks and distance and hand washing and just, moving back into life. That's what you guys are trying to accomplish here. The question I forgot.
In that, well, Jason threw out some dates that one is
Yes.
more than a week from now and one is a whole nother week after that. And I'm just, initially that was what I was thinking, but then after what Gary said yesterday, it kind of seems like the hospital's in the shape that they need to be in now. And as long as paperwork could get in order, would these more limited activities that we're talking about be able to start, early next week?
Well, we're prepared now because we prepared for a much larger amount of infection. So we're like super prepared. So I think we're prepared to go, for you to go proceed with this whenever you're comfortable doing that. And we're prepared for the consequences, which I think will be minimal, if any, based upon what we know about the island right at this moment.
Thank you. Rita?
Yeah, maybe Dr. Pearl could just quickly answer because I'm getting some text. There's, I think in the update yesterday, the hospital said there were 2 people under investigation at the hospital. Have they not tested positive, or
They have not tested positive. Okay. And that patients under investigation is a really large category of really symptoms which are so mild, which put a person into that description. It would be stuffy nose and feeling achy. There are various criteria that put a patient into that category. They are not certainly high risk. There are not people that seem to have COVID-19, but they are both negative at this point.
Rita, sorry, you do just have to identify who texted you that question. I got into trouble for that the other night. Oh, but you're muted, so we don't know what you're saying. Yeah, you're still muted. Still muted. Rita, still muted.
Sorry, I'm having trouble handling my phone and the computer. Got one from Heather Williams. And I have to go through here. Got one from Ava. I think those were the 2 that I had.
Okay.
One other question. Now I've forgotten it. I think there's some confusion in the world that I'm in as to the less caution now with the whole back to landscaping. There was the, yep, go for it. But just confirming that that's not applied. We should still be cautious with the social distancing and the masks and the gloves. There's a lot of people spraying their groceries and doing all these things still. And there's just confusion about to what message we should be listening to or how the 2 fit together.
Yes, so many people take extreme caution, and that is a personal choice. And many people will choose to be very cautious about it, and others would rather go back to work because that's what's important to them. But I think for our community public health, the social distancing and the masking and washing your own hands is critical. So to maintain public health, those things are the critical part. and the hot spots around the world when this virus was incubating and moving around, people were packed in like sardines. They didn't have this mitigation strategy, which we fortunately came into effect right as the virus hit New England. And so we have found that the disaster has been mitigated somewhat by the immediate impact of social distance, physical distance, and masking and gloving. And that immediately made an impact on this virus and the spread of the virus. So, you know, and we're all tired of the word unprecedented, but it is unprecedented. So some people wash their groceries and some don't do that. And I don't see that it has made a difference in the development of disease around the community.
Thank you. Does anybody else are there any more questions for Dr. Pearl, or do we feel fairly comfortable with what she said? Because it is 3 o'clock and she needs to go.
We wish we had all the answers and we just don't. I'm sorry for that.
Thank you so much. It's been extremely helpful.
Thanks very much.
I mean, this is ultimately a Board of Health decision on enacting this. I mean, obviously we want to be advisors, but I think that there are a few decision points on how you actually put this into action in terms of when it starts, and you know, a little bit more clarification on registering what employees are going to be on a site, how that, and the travel to lunch or to pick up supplies. Am I getting everything that we've got decision points on?
Go ahead, Greg.
Can I ask a question about the landscape? And I apologize if this was addressed and I missed it, but there are two categories of work here. One is allowable activities. The other is secondary activities. Secondary activities may be authorized for two-person crews, but it doesn't say anything about how many people can be for the allowable activities. Is that crews of unlimited size?
I don't think that's the intention, Jeff.
Let me just unmute. Yeah, sorry, it may just be some sequencing in the document, Greg, and I apologize for that. The crews got limited further down in the general on-the-job procedures. So there's a bullet that's in there, and I'll just read it. It just says, staff will work independently as much as possible. Anytime a second person is required on the site for safety purposes, they should be required to arrive in a second vehicle and maintain social distancing requirements. No more than 2 people are allowed on an individual site, was one of the bullets there. If you feel that should move or move around, I guess I would leave that to you, or take your advice on where you think that should be sequencing wise.
Okay. I didn't really get a chance to look at this document very much before the call started. But I think I'd probably want to go through it and you know, make sure that everything that's in here fits with landscaping. And it also does look like this is using an older version of the bullet points for the safety protocols. But I think if we can have the decision of the boards on the substance, what landscape should be allowed, I can then come up with a final document.
Rita?
Sorry, that's actually one thing I meant to bring up, Jeff, is that nowhere in there is it defined whether it's landscape maintenance, landscape construction, particularly with any of the exemptions. So I think that the landscaping, what we're talking about, does need to be defined. And I think particularly if we're talking 1 person per job site, there's a lot of jobs. A mason can go do a wall, 1 person, the stones are there. So I think we need to define what it is.
And that might play into some of the discussion about excavation, where 1 person could go on a bobcat or something to.
Yeah.
Jeff, is that to you?
Sure. So up in the original purpose in that document, we originally focused it on just maintenance of plants. obviously there's actually a statement in there that it won't include installation of hardscaping or new landscape installations. Um, I think if the board is comfortable, if it's a single person, we can probably craft some language to include that not being a restriction for a single individual working by themselves, if that's the direction that both boards would like that to go.
What's the consensus on that? And can we sort of marry this same language on the one worker over to construction related activity? Christy?
This might have been answered, and I think we have kind of gone in circles a little bit, so apologize in advance. But if we open up to one person, is that going to be to every building, or is that going to be just to what we had said was weather tight? Because if we open up to one person for tiling or painting or plumbing or electrician, is that over expanding, or am I just being overly cautious?
I think the idea was that there have been so many people who've asked for I have this one thing that I can go do and it would give me some work, and I'm not going to have any exposure to anybody. And it's going back to something that the Board of Health tried to put in prior, but it maybe wasn't clearly enough defined on. They would, and I think the idea is that they would register with the building department or with natural resources and say, like, I'm going to be working on this job site this day or these days. And so the address would be in there, and it would be there's no commingling. There's not one person for 2 hours and one person for the next 2 hours. It's on any given day specifically. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify and add that I would want it to be kind of one person per day and not this rotating shift. I think we also wanted to clarify the 4 people on the work site, I assume would be the same day as well.
Yeah, I think that we covered that earlier, but let's make sure that everybody's comfortable with that. And that proper sanitation happens in between if crews are changing.
And then I just have one other numbers question. With landscaping, we're limiting to 2 and construction is 4. Is there a reason for that?
Paul Murphy talked about that because the construction that we're limiting to 4 is very restricted, but some of the work is really not safe without 4 people. It's framing work where sometimes to like finish putting a wall up or something like that, they really need 4 people. It was the number that he felt was the only appropriately safe number for that type of work.
Thank you. I think that explains everything.
Greg?
So Madam Chair, I have a list of 4 substantive issues that I think need resolution. Some of these we may be closer to than others, so I'll just list them off. So the first is putting in language for single worker job sites and some requirements for registration. The second is whether we are going to allow off-island workers, prohibit off-island workers, or do something in between by having a preference for on-island. Related to that, whether we are going to allow workers to leave the site during the day. And then finally, an effective date.
Yep, I think that sums up the decision points. I mean, I can rattle off what I think. I think that it should be suggested to minimize trips from the job site, but not that someone's going to get into trouble if they go to Stop and Shop to pick up lunch. I'm going to use Stop and Shop now because I think we gave too much publicity to Cumbies. And I think that the preference for on-island workers and that everyone registers who will be working on their site with the building department or with natural resources. And I think that this should start as soon as the paperwork's in order from the directive of the hospital. Was that everything? So whoever else wants to jump in on that, please feel free.
Madam Chair, do we want to maybe take these one at a time to see if we can build
get a consensus?
Yeah.
What do you want to start with?
So I had single worker jobs. It seemed like we were pretty close on that.
Oh, yes, sorry. I do agree with single worker jobs. I think that there should be some directives on safe, that they really should be one person jobs and not them trying to take on a 2 or 4 person job for safety purposes. But, people are going to have to take some personal responsibility. Jason, your thoughts?
Do you mean the single person jobs on the first and second thing we're working on, which is the year-round employee housing and weather type? Or do you mean overall?
No, those are still 4. I'm
Okay.
talking about one person on any job as long as they register.
The third thing we're working on. Okay.
But when are we taking that as number 1? So that's what I think, but what does everybody else think?
I agree.
Christy, you want to speak?
I just wanted to say I agree as long as we have the kind of one on-island worker regulation or suggestion in there. I think last time we saw an increase in people coming over as soon as we opened that up.
Yes, so on-island preference and that they have to register the address and their name with the building department. Is that
Yes.
is that fair?
Use the word, using the word preference.
To some extent, people are going to have to take some personal responsibility for their own health and the health of the people around them. Matt?
I'd rather it be a requirement, but I'll go with the majority and I'll vote with the majority, but I'd rather it be a requirement. I think that, again, the churn is going to be our biggest issue upcoming. So, and, I think we need to keep that front and center.
Okay. Jason?
Just to get my thoughts on the record, I support preference, as Malcolm said, and I'm okay with up to 2 people for safety issues. But if, obviously, if the Board of Health votes on just 1, then that's what we would do.
Okay, I think the consensus that I'm hearing is for the word preference. Do we want to take, Steve, you should really be the one calling a vote on these things because it's going to be under you guys. So I think I should yield to you, Steve, to go through these bullet points for a vote, and we can say what we think.
Yeah, sure. This is directed to Greg. Are you looking for a specific date for us to give you, or are you going to have this written up now? Because I may think that some of the board members aren't responsible until we see the final draft we're going to vote on.
Would you circulate a final draft and have the chair sign off on it?
So we can proceed on this in one of 2 ways. So first off, when I was thinking of an effective date, I was thinking that we need to come up with a date that people can start working. So that needs to be in the document, and I do think that requires a vote of the board. My initial thought was that you would open it up to applications on one particular date, and then a week later actual work could start, so that everybody was kind of on the same footing, and it would give staff the opportunity to process the applications. In terms of approvals, on the 4 bullet points, at this point, I'm just really looking for consensus so we can put the issues in the document. And then once we have consensus on the 4 issues, you can decide you either want to approve it subject to circulation of a final draft and authorize the chair to sign, or we can come back at a second meeting and have you vote to approve the final document.
I like the idea of the chair signing as long as other board members don't have any major issues. Jim? Jim, you're muted.
I would like to go over the whole thing that you people have before. I think the board would like to go over it as a board before we sign. That's my opinion.
Malcolm?
Yeah, I agree. I think we obviously cannot vote until we see the entire document. And I would feel much more comfortable if we scheduled in 2 days a 5-minute meeting of the board to vote.
Okay.
I agree with that.
Okay. As long as you guys are ready to do another meeting.
Listen, there's not a lot else going on the island right now.
True.
It's the best entertainment we have.
Yeah. The staff might not love you for calling another meeting. But you want to keep going through the bullet points? Those other
Yeah, you might.
points? Greg, you're muted.
Oh, sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yep.
So I think I have consensus on a preference for on-island workers with a requirement that contractors provide a daily log with the name and address of each worker.
Right.
Okay, so check that off. What about the issue of allowed to leave the job site during the day?
Yeah. Jim, you're muted.
To go to lunch if they want, and I still don't agree with them have to go directly home at the end of the shift. I mean, at the end of the shift, they could maybe want to go down and check the mail or go pick something up for their wife to Stop and Shop or something. I don't agree with them have to go directly home at the end of their shift.
I mean, there could be some other reasons why people have to leave the job site, whether it's to care for a child or an emergency. So, I mean, I would agree with that too. It's pretty limited.
Didn't we say minimize?
Yeah.
It should be a directive to minimize in
Yeah.
my mind. These are all adults who can leave their houses now. We're not in we're not in quarantine.
Mhm.
Sorry.
Malcolm?
I agree with all it said.
Okay, so consensus that people will be allowed to leave the job site during the day, but a directive to try to minimize unnecessary trips.
Fine.
Correct.
All right, what about single worker jobs? Open to any type of work, not just those listed in the document.
Right. Yeah.
I'm comfortable with that, but they have to register with their
Register.
respective department.
I'm comfortable with that, but how do you schedule that? I mean, if you have a plumber or an electrician or a heating guy that needs to get in, how do they decide who's going to do that if you got one day open?
Is it on? You would just do it on any given day,
Okay.
right? You would have to register for that for the day or days that one person was going to be there, but no overlap of people throughout the day.
Okay. Thank you.
Is that fair wording, Greg? Malcolm?
I agree.
Yep, I agree.
Just as a curiosity, how would this apply in a house that is occupied, where the residents might be there while the work is being done?
They probably have to comply with social distancing.
Correct. Exactly.
I don't think anybody wants to go into a house that's occupied where they feel like they're going to get some kind of exposure. They'd probably be comfortable if it's somebody who's been at home for the past month and hasn't gone anywhere, but they might not be so comfortable if it's someone who just traveled here. Christy raised her hand, I think.
I was just going to say, I thought we had a provision that you had to notify if it's occupied within 24 hours. Would all of those provisions go through to the single worker?
I'm not sure about that.
Let's see. What did we have?
Oh, is Jeff raising his hand? Jeff, are you raising your hand?
Yes, I was just going to comment from the landscaping protocols. Any property that's going to be worked on, they're required to give that property owner 24 hours notice that they're going to be there, regardless.
So maybe that should be universal.
I think that's probably what you should do. If the plumber has to come, he call the person, say, listen, I'm scheduling to come Tuesday. So if you have someplace to go on Tuesday, it'd be all right if I would come if you would leave.
The 24-hour requirement is in the existing draft.
I'm all right with that.
Okay, so we have consensus on single worker with certain conditions, correct? Okay, so then the last issue I have is when should this go into effect?
I think as soon as you guys could get it in writing and you're happy with it and you can get it to the Board of Health, we'll schedule a meeting and we'll go through it the way we want. And I think if we're satisfied with it, we'll give you Stephen will give you a date.
Jason?
We could probably decide on a work what date you could start work. And then if we could get a meeting Tuesday, Monday's a holiday, and adopt the phase one, that would give time people to get their paperwork in.
Do you think you guys could have a meeting sooner than Tuesday? Jason's got his hands raised.
I'm not sure if it has to be on a weekday, or
I think
We've been having emergency meetings all over the place.
we could do it anytime, and
Sure.
even a holiday, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
There's no marathon happening on Monday.
Yeah.
Not that exciting. Jason has had his hand up.
If we ask Greg how long it would take to get the document to us, say he got it to us by tomorrow, we looked it over, we could have a meeting Sunday or Monday or any day.
Jason, just speak. Everyone else is jumping in.
Kind of follow protocol. Mr. Chairman, I think whatever date you decide on, I would just try to give us at least 48 hours to get all the word out to all the different groups that don't, look on the website and watch this, to people, whether they're speaking, Portuguese, Spanish. There's a good group that is getting the word out, and they figured some things out. They need some time to do the videos, and so whatever, if you decided that on Sunday, Malcolm, if you can, put the date on a Tuesday or Wednesday, just to give some time to get the messaging out and explain and educate everyone.
There's two parameters here. We could set the date for work to start, call an emergency meeting, whether it's this Sunday, look at the reading, adopt it. That gives everybody a week to get things in order, get the word out. How does the rest of the board feel about that?
I think the hospital's ready for you. I think you should set it for Wednesday. Oh.
Yeah.
I just think we should move as fast as we can. I mean, this is very interesting. We're writing an instruction book or a manual for something we don't know anything about. And whatever we do, some of it's going to be right, some of it's going to be wrong, some of it's going to be more complicated than we need. But I think we're doing the best we can with extremely not very much information. You have ask an expert, 2 experts, 2 things, you get 10 opinions. So we do what we can do. So as soon as we can.
John?
I mean, the other thing that I've been thinking of is what the federal government is starting to talk about are the 2-week milestones. And we've had 2 weeks with no cases. They're going to be looking, in terms of loosening things, 2 weeks of declining cases. So the sooner you institute us, the sooner we start sort of getting this little bit of data and gets us up to like that. If you start next week, then it gets us to May 4th, when the governor may or may not make additional, may make changes. So we want to have that like 2 weeks of data. And it also, there's some economic issues for people on top of that.
Rita?
I'm just wondering, I'm throwing this to Jeff, if we're going to have any kind of 2-week wording or messaging in our revised landscape plan. We had a 1 week between some activities, if that should be changed to 2 weeks.
Yeah, I think that's the will of the board. I mean, I think we can adjust that language, or the Board of Health. They're the ones that have to authorize that ultimately. So they can review it week to week or by 2. So I kind of leave that to them for whatever time length they would like there. But I'm happy to put it to whatever they wish.
Greg?
So I think I'd want to hear from staff as to how long they think it's going to take them to process the applications. From what I heard earlier in the week when we spoke, that we wanted to have everybody be on the same footing, which was why we had suggested having one date to start receiving applications and then another date to actually start doing work. I suggested a week. It could be less than that, but I think that's really for staff to decide what their capability would be to process these applications.
Leslie?
So at Plus, we've had a lot of discussions about how we will handle this administratively. And I think the building commissioner has probably already heard from a lot of the people who would want an exception from the order that you're going to adopt. I mean, the one person jobs is something that we haven't thought about as much, but we are ready, willing, and able to start processing the applications and to turn them over as quickly as possible as soon as you all pick a date. So we're ready. We want to see people get back to work.
So how fast can you have this to us, Greg?
I don't think there's a significant amount of work left, knock on wood. So, I mean, I'd probably want to get input from staff as well, before we had put pen to paper on signatures. But, I mean, I could certainly, if you were going to meet late on Sunday or early on Monday, I should be able to do that.
Okay. How's the board feel for calling an emergency meeting on Sunday?
Works for me.
I'd like to get this done as fast, but like I said before, we need to, as a board, we need to go over this from beginning to end to make sure, because when we sign our name to this, we have to live with it. And, some people are going to love us and some people are going to hate us. So, I want to really look at this thing over before I sign. So Sunday's fine for me.
Okay, and then possibly would start work date, which would be when?
Well,
Wednesday?
I get any day we agree. I mean, it's not going to take us long to read this and either give them our approval, or maybe I doubt we'll have to ask for any changes, but we just have to go through it and make sure that we're satisfied with it. And whatever they want, whatever date they want. I mean, if we're ready for them Tuesday morning or Monday afternoon, I think, whatever people decide to do, let them do it, as long as we're all satisfied with what we're signing.
Anybody else have any comments from the?
Christy has her hand up.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, instead of a back to work date, is there more of a date that we would start accepting applications? And Leslie made it sound like possibly Tuesday morning we could start if this was passed on Sunday.
John first, yeah.
Leslie can probably speak to that. I was just going to say it's going to take most of these people, especially on the bigger jobs, a little bit of time to get organized. But why not start a rolling, like start accepting applications to, well, as soon as you pass it, start accepting applications with, people can go back to work as soon as Tuesday or something.
Any comments from the rest of the board?
Well, I mean, I think they could start, I mean, we have an outside date. I mean, we're gonna be done by Monday, right? I mean, there can't be anything that we can't get settled by Monday. So if we know we'll be done by this thing Monday, why can't they start taking applications Tuesday
Well,
morning?
I think we'll be done Sunday if we have a
Well, yeah,
meeting
that's what
then.
I'm saying. We could be done Sunday.
Rita?
I think unless Leslie has an idea of how long it will take to process these applications, I mean, it's not just a matter of companies submitting their application and they're good to go, correct? It has to be reviewed and then they're given a sign off. I mean, if we accept them Tuesday morning, then it could be rolling where it's as soon as Plus can get it back, then you can start.
Go ahead, Leslie.
So the emergency order says that we'll review them within 48 hours and provide a response. And I think that's plenty of time. I mean, a lot of people have already reached out to me. They've reached out to the building commissioner. They've reached out to the director. And I really think we already know about most of these. They've just been waiting to be able to move forward.
Jason?
Just, I want to emphasize whatever you end up voting on, what Greg finishes up, is to, let's try to work on making it very simple for people to understand, and that we're all using the same language. Because even what you said there, Rita, I had to think, like, is she just talking about the weather tiding, or is she talking about the one person registering, and then is the weather tiding as an application? Just so we're all using the same language so we can get it out to everybody. We all know we're going to get 1,000 questions in the next 72 hours. So I just want to be clear that we have clear language.
Greg?
Yes, I can make sure that the language concerning the procedures are consistent throughout.
Rita?
Yes, got her hand.
Just to Jason's point too, to clarify for myself now, are we talking about landscape and construction right now, or are we still just talking about construction in terms of applications being received and then start dates and how long it takes for those applications to be processed?
Aren't we talking about all of it? And maybe Jeff wants to weigh in on how his processing is going to work.
I was making sure also, one, just to clarify for myself, but also because Leslie brings up a good point that a lot of these building ones, again, it's maybe 26 properties plus the people, the one person job site, that will be a lot more, but they know about these projects already, whereas this is going to be a lot of information coming into Jeff in this format, probably this way for the first time.
John?
For the single worker, I mean, and staff, correct me as how you want to manage it, but I was just thinking that they would like email in, I'm going to be working on April 25th at 50 Main Street, and this is my name, and it just goes into like a spreadsheet kind of list, so that if there's ever any questions, they say, yeah, they registered.
That is what Dawn and I had talked about, and during the meeting, I've already emailed the help desk to see if they can help us create a really simple online fillable form. So you can just go to the website, fill it out, and automatically submit it to the building commissioner or to Jeff Carlson or whoever the appropriate person is. So hopefully that's something we can do, but we do want to keep it really, really simple.
Yeah. Just to add on, I'm fully confident that we can handle the applications and the tracking for that, and whether it's through an online portal or through the office, I fully believe we can handle that.
Jason?
I just want to make sure, again, we're using the same language. I would suggest that using the word application would only be for the weather tiding permitted jobs, and registering is used for the one person jobs, or whatever you suggest. So there's some separation so we know what we're talking about. Does that make sense?
Yeah, Leslie was nodding her head. It makes sense. Yeah.
Apparently NCTV 18 has paused.
So we're not on anymore?
It keeps freezing for some reason.
Rita?
I'm sorry if this is just another long meeting where I'm getting confused, but it might be better to separate the construction from the landscape because landscaping application process, the one person per site, we hadn't talked about, just want to make sure, are they registering? We hadn't talked about that, but if we're talking about the two documents together, then people might think that they have to register every time there's one person at a site. So I don't know if it would be easier to just separate them or and talk about them distinctly, because it sounds like I think there's two very different processes for how this is going to go forward. The construction has an application for the weather tighting, and then it has an email for the one person per job site. The landscaping, Jeff, is there an application?
Yeah, we have a registration process for the COVID officer that's there, but I mean, we can put together and kind of mirror the application for a single person on a single site. I think that's easily doable.
Okay, so one thing I was going to say is for the construction, I think it would be fine if a painter says one day, says I'm going to be there for, I anticipate 4 days. I don't know that they should be emailing every single day that they're at the job site. For landscaping, I don't know that it's actually really, Jeff, maybe you think it is, but I think it's possible that landscapers are going to go to 4 or 5 different properties in a day, depending on weather, depending on timing. That might be 2 properties or it might be 8. So I don't know that you can actually reasonably expect to track the one person per job site with the landscaping, but so I don't know if it's worth it.
On.
Couldn't they just throw out all the addresses that they anticipate being working on in like a 2 or 3 day period? And with like the painter who thinks it's a week-long project, just say, I anticipate to be there all of next week.
I think whatever it is, it should be easy and straightforward. And I actually think that the landscaping side, the log is the most important part. So maybe they don't even have to apply every day. They just have to have a log ready if it's needed.
Yeah.
Yeah, I might suggest for the single person, if that's the case, I mean, they'll have to register as their own COVID officer with us anyways. Then we can work with those people to get kind of a projected, maybe a week or 2 week look ahead on the sites they're anticipating being on. And then we'll have that, and they'll have to keep the log requirements as well, so we can kind of verify that back if necessary. But I think that's workable.
This question is, Greg, do you think they should be lumped together in this order, or they should be separate?
I thought a decision had been made earlier that we were going to have 2 separate documents, one for construction, one for landscaping.
So we'd have to vote on, 2 separate motions.
Correct.
Matt? You're muted.
Let me try again. Have we decided on 2 worker on landscaping? Or are we doing 1 worker? I thought someone help me out.
Yeah.
So the original protocol included for up to 2 workers on the site for safety purposes. I think we were just talking about the possibility of addressing the single worker on a single site, but for the approved activities, they would be allowed up to 2. And that's all logged with daily logs by who is where and who is together.
I'm fine. That's perfect.
Are we comfortable to take a vote on implementing the construction and the landscape. Possibly to take applications on Monday and have a meeting Sunday to accept these number 5 order.
So are we going to look at two sets of things to read or one? Are they going to be together or are they going to be separated for us to sign? We signing one for construction and assigning another one for landscaping, the Board of Health?
Yes.
Okay.
Rita raised her hand.
I was just gonna say we should probably vote on them separately then, just to,
Yeah.
and just, I think it's gonna be key. I'm still feeling like the process for the application and getting these rolling is a little bit unclear, and I just think we're gonna need to have it in, you know, a 3-step, here's what you do to make by the time Tuesday rolls around. Or maybe that's what we should be signing on Sunday.
So are you adding something else to something that Greg has to put in there?
Well, I think the process needs to be clear as to how, so the construction has an application. We've just gone through application for weather tighting, registration process for 1 person per job site for construction, and then there's something different. And I don't think that is written out clearly anywhere yet. So I don't know if that's Greg's job or that's actually administrative to say, how is this going to work? So when a landscaper calls up, they know what the process is for registering. I don't think that's there. If it's there, I've missed it, but I think it's probably more administrative than Greg.
Yeah, I would have to defer to staff on that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm happy to put together a very clear kind of step-by-step to get registered for the landscaping portion and can have that ready for you guys before Sunday as well.
Okay.
Maybe Leslie can do the same, or Paul.
Leslie?
So we have the form for the waiver. We're going to develop a registration, and I thought we would distribute that through the Builders Association and try to get something posted online for people to use with directions, just a simple instruction sheet, I guess. Did I answer the question or did I miss something? Sorry.
Can you have that for them for Sunday?
Oh, for Sunday. Sure, yes.
Okay, any other questions? Jason?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just want to clarify one last time. We're talking about 1 to 2 people for landscaping, that's separate, and then possibly 1 person at construction. For not for weather tidying, not for that. Just the. Is that what I'm hearing?
That's what I believe so.
Okay, just want to make sure. So when I get questions, and the second thing I was wondering is, do we need to think about road work, sewer work, that kind of stuff? Is that part of this, Leslie, or is that DPW? They would handle that. We can talk about it another week. I'm sure we're going to get those questions.
John?
So that would be a different order and something handled entirely separately through the DPW.
Yeah, but I thought that we were talking about allowance that's kind of universal for building and landscaping for 1 person that could go do a job. And that would potentially apply to somebody building a stone wall or somebody running a machine, an excavation machine, right? Masonry kind of stuff and excavation. Is that the intent here in terms of construction and landscaping? For the single person that just registers, doesn't apply, registers.
Sorry, I mixed up the single person and the order. So my response was about the order, not the single person allowance.
I don't know, I think, hey, Jeff, you could probably answer that question, but in the provision of the landscaping, I don't think whether it's one person or two, did it constitute new construction? Rita?
No, in there it didn't have new construction listed, but if people are feeling comfortable with that as a one-person crew, if they want to do masonry or do that work by themselves, I'm happy to make that adjustment.
I'm just trying to get the word, we want to get the wording right and not to have people confused.
Yeah, I just want it to be fair that it covers kind of any kind of construction industry that that requires just one person or that can be done with one person.
Right, yeah, yeah.
I think we can get the language to reflect those thoughts for sure before Sunday.
So,
So,
Greg?
Yeah, there was, I think Jason had a question earlier about road work and DPW type work. I believe that work is currently allowed under the supplemental order. It says that essential construction includes work to build or repair roads, bridges, transit facilities, utilities, hospitals, or healthcare facilities, emergency utility, road, or building work, such as to repair water or sewer leaks, new utility connections to occupied buildings. So I think that type of work is already allowed. This really only applies to residential construction that is currently prohibited.
Okay. Any other questions? So I may need a little help drafting this motion, Greg, with what were two different things that we're voting to do and separating the construction as one and the landscaping as another.
So I guess I'm not quite sure that you need a vote at this point. There's consensus on what you want to see in the document, and a directive to me and to staff to finish that work for you to vote on Sunday.
Sunday, okay.
So I don't think that you need to have a vote today.
Okay. Is that good with everybody else? So how do we go about calling an emergency meeting tomorrow? Yeah, Sunday, excuse me.
Maybe you just pick a time.
Yeah, the chair can schedule a meeting, or you can vote on a date and a time, and we'll want to get, even if it's an emergency, we'll want to get notice of that posted with the town clerk as soon as possible.
Okay, so what's a good time for everybody?
Anytime is fine with me.
Do you
Anytime.
preference, afternoon?
How about 1 o'clock?
Welcome. Is one good for you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
One's fine with me. Rita's good?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, can I get a motion to hold a meeting on Sunday? Not sure what the date is off the top of my head, at 1 o'clock to review the draft and vote on the implementation?
I'll make that motion.
Second.
By roll call. For favor, James?
Yes.
Helene?
Yes.
Malcolm?
Yes.
Rita?
Is there a workaround for that?
Yes, and I just looked like Dawn, you might have had a question.
Yeah, no, I was just asking if you want the full board to be a joint meeting with you, or if you just want me to sit in again. Or
Yeah, I think it'd be fine with you sitting in.
okay.
And so chairman says aye, so we'll have a meeting scheduled for 1 o'clock on Sunday. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye, yeah. So we're good on that. And we'll wait to get the draft from Greg. We'll look it over this weekend. We'll get things rolling.
All right, thank you.
Thank
Is
you.
that-
Thanks so much, guys. This was
All right, take care.
lots of important work here.
Okay, thanks everybody.
Oh,
Bye-bye.
I'm sorry. I have to make a motion to adjourn.
Yeah.
Sorry. By roll call. Jason?
Aye.
Or actually, can someone actually make the motion?
Oh,
Sorry.
second.
By roll call, Jason?
Aye.
Matt?
Aye.
Rita?
Aye.
Christy?
Aye.
Okay, Dawn, aye.
Okay, same for the health. I get a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second. Okay, by roll call, James,
Yes.
Helene,
Yes.
Malcolm,
Yes.
Rita,
Yes.
and Chairman says aye. Thanks, Roberto.
All right. Take care.
Thank you.
Everybody.
See you all
Thank
See
Sunday.
you Sunday.
See you on Sunday.
Just want to say sorry to everyone who thought there was going to be public comment.
Yeah.
I don't think it could happen today. I think
Yeah.
people were wanting it, but it couldn't happen.
Okay. Thanks, Jason.
Wow.